amendment by amendment, but I will take it all together, so I'll be speaking for a while. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for coming to the House and indeed for your engagement and the engagement by your predecessor, Minister Bruton, on the Traveller Culture and History in Education Bill. We heard at a briefing earlier that it is as of a similar significance to the recognition of travellers as an ethnic minority, Ireland's only ethnic minority group. We're holding something very, very important and precious within these walls today. I'm pleased to acknowledge that the bill has been a catalyst for the recently completed National Council for Curriculum and Assessments report, Traveller History and Culture in the Curriculum, a curriculum audit, which is now signed off, though not yet published. And I want to thank John Hammond, Aoife Rush and other members of the NCCA project team for working so well and so constructively with me and the advisory group, members of which are here today, including Owen de Vardoon, who coordinated, Dr. Cindy Joyce and others. And I would like to particularly recognise the work of that advisory group. The curriculum audit on traveller culture and history by NCCA would not have happened without this bill. And indeed, the bill has also been a catalyst for some announcements today around the inspection of schools as it relates to the teaching of traveller culture and history in the curriculum and on teacher training, and I'll come back to those. So it's an important milestone, and I hope the Minister will be able to direct the resources requested by John Hammond from the budget 2020 to implement the recommendations, because we have plenty of reports that don't get implemented, and you do have to have the means to do that. And further, I would suggest that the Minister might give consideration to reserving a place for travellers on the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment. Also, I suppose, to point out that the bill is not the first of its kind. Similar initiatives are in place in New Zealand, Australia and parts of Canada, where there are Indigenous communities and peoples, and where such legislation proves successful. So turning to your first proposed amendment, Minister, I am opposing it. This amendment removes the provision for the inclusion of traveller culture and history in the curriculum and for it to be taught by recognised schools. This proposed amendment means that schools would simply have to promote a knowledge and understanding of the culture and history of the traveller community, rather than teach it as part of the syllabus. It is possible that this obligation to promote traveller culture and history could be satisfied with even the most minimal activity on the part of each individual school, if at all. Past performance would indicate that this is the more probable outcome. Under the amendment proposed by the Minister, promotion would occur on a school-by-school basis, resulting in some schools promoting it to a greater or lesser extent. And there is evidence for my scepticism. The 2001 Department of Education guidelines on traveller education in second-level schools state that schools have to be proactive in acknowledging and validating traveller ways of living. Across the 14 subject areas identified in the DES guidelines, only one, social, personal and health education, reference travellers in lesson plans since then. None of the others, like history, like music, like business studies, like geography, arts, crafts and design or any others, reference traveller culture and history. Guidelines from the department are honoured in the breach. 18 years on, these guidelines were universally not adopted by schools. These guidelines have been ignored without sanction by schools up and down the country. Therefore, with guidance and advice from travellers, traveller organisations like the Irish Traveller Movement and the National Traveller Women's Forum and others nationally, as well as from local groups like the Cork Traveller Visibility Group, and with the legal expertise of Barrister James Kane and Pila, I proposed this bill in July 2018 to address the great gap in teaching and in the knowledge of traveller culture and history. A key purpose of the bill is to dispel myths and lies that are at the heart of prejudice, racism and discrimination, an everyday experience for travellers in Ireland. These myths have caused the perpetration of a cycle of victim blaming, as described by psychologist William Ryan, where members of the dominant community see features of the social life of a marginalised community that are the result of poverty and marginalisation as essential features of that community's culture, and use this observation to justify attitudes that cause this cycle of poverty, exclusion and marginalisation to be perpetuated. As a people, we are ignorant of traveller history and culture. Such ignorance is the context in which discrimination is a daily reality for the traveller community. According to research by Michael McGrail of NUI Maynooth in 2010, 60% of settled people would not welcome a traveller as a member to the family. 63.7% reject travellers based on their way of life, and 18% would deny Irish citizenship to travellers. Shocking statistics, I'm sure people here would agree. Irish people do not know ourselves. We do not know our history. We do not know our culture. Travellers and traveller children and their life chances are the collateral damage of that ignorance, that denial. Traveller's story is part of Ireland's story. We must be taught traveller history and culture. I've completed my first year in a master's in family psychotherapy. One of the first things we learn is the importance of knowing ourselves, our own history. We do a genogram and try to populate our family trees, investigating and filling in all the blanks, going back generations, so that we may know ourselves. So that, to paraphrase Black civil rights activist and writer James Baldwin, we may be able to claim our birthright. Traveller culture and history is a great big blank in Ireland's genogram. We do not know ourselves fully and wholly today because we do not know traveller history and culture. And may I ask people here today, what do any of us really know about traveller history? Were any of us taught it? This omission is dangerous, and it's an airbrushing of Ireland's only ethnic minority from its rightful place in Irish history. We are not just denying our identity, but we are excluding a whole community. This gaping hole of knowledge has resulted in poor policy making. Travellers still speak of and bear the scars of the 1962 itinerancy report, and there are other examples too. So, Minister, there have been efforts. The DES and the NCCA's intercultural guidance of 2005 are positive, but they're also ignored. The Department of Education's approach of seeking rather than providing for the inclusion of traveller culture and history in the curriculum taught by recognised schools in the state simply has not worked. It hasn't educated the general population about traveller culture and history. There has been an invisibility about traveller culture and history in our schools. Traveller children have not been validated in our education system. If traveller children were so validated, why then would only 80%, approximately 80% transfer from primary to secondary school, as some indicators show? According to Pavy Point, many travellers say that the first time they are made to feel bad about their traveller identity is when they cross the threshold to school. That sometimes at school, travellers are made to feel education's just not for them. A traveller child may actually be the only traveller child in the class and can be treated negatively and suspiciously. And Owen de Vordoon spoke about this bill being an opportunity of lifting the responsibility for travellers' culture and education from the shoulders of that little child to us as a state. So is it any surprise that travellers are over 50 times more likely to leave school without the leaving cert in comparison to the general population? 50 times. Just 13% of female travellers were educated to upper secondary level or above, compared with almost 70% of the general population. 57% of male travellers were educated to primary level at most. The CSO National Traveller Education Statistics from 2016 estimates that only 167 travellers ever went on to third level education. There is a history of legislation failing to protect the traveller community. This bill in its current form seeks to change that. Traveller culture and history and education should be and needs to be mandatory. So well-meaning, well-intentioned, aspirational guidelines and directions to schools, done with undoubted goodwill, but without the force of law, simply hasn't and doesn't deliver to all travellers the teaching of traveller culture and history. It doesn't deliver it to all of us. So, Minister, I don't doubt your sincerity that the end, to your end, that traveller culture and history should be included in the curriculum and taught well. However, with regret, I believe that your means and your amendment number 1 makes the prospect less likely than with the traveller culture bill as originally proposed. So I oppose, and I urge you to think again. I'm also opposing the second amendment proposed for similar reasons. I regret that it is proposed to remove the words promote and teach traveller culture and history. A drafting in section 9, though not as strong in the original draft of the bill, but one for the Minister perhaps to consider, and as I hope he will when he takes this bill to the Dáil, is to promote the understanding and appreciation of traveller culture. That would be a better amendment, and I would ask the Minister to consider it. I'm not sure what the additional benefit within the meaning of the Act would bring. In fact, some might argue that travellers have not fully vindicated their rights under the Equal Status Act in relation to education and discrimination therein as it currently exists. I would also be interested in hearing the Minister's reasoning. I would also draw the Minister's attention to European conventions and treaties which Ireland has ratified. I refer to the report of the Advisory Committee to the Framework of Convention for the Protection of National Minorities in June 2019. Its recommendations at paragraph 77. The Advisory Committee calls on authorities, in the case of the Irish State specifically, to support the inclusion of traveller culture and history in the curriculum taught in schools and to further promote and enhance an inclusive school environment for traveller students in order to combat discrimination. Minister, I have drawn attention to another recommendation, number 2004 of the Committee of Ministers to Member States on the education of Roma Gypsy children in Europe, which recommended that curricula would consider and reflect the culture and history of the Gypsy and traveller communities. The Spanish Education Minister just a few weeks ago recognised that it is fundamental that Roma students feel included and welcomed in school, as well as the important role of education in combating negative stereotypes. This is a country example that Ireland should and could pay some attention to. The amendment proposed by the Minister, the second amendment, would be contrary to this recommendation of European bodies and commitments made in conventions and treaties that Ireland has signed up to and ratified. So again, on Amendment 2, I urge the Minister to think again about what I have raised, and that's why I will be opposing this amendment. In relation to the third amendment, I'm opposing this amendment to delete my amendment of Section 30 of the Education Act 1998. The reasons are, as I've already set out, the bill needs teeth to deliver traveller culture and history to be included in the curriculum, taught and taught well in every school to every child, in every recognised school, at every cycle, from the early years into primary, junior and senior cycles. Minister, you know that the cliche well, I'm sure, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and travellers know this only too well. And this evaluation is at the heart of arguing for a mandatory requirement of schools to teach traveller culture and history. There has been a litany of failed legislation and false dawns for travellers. In 1998, the Housing Traveller Accommodation Act, now under review by Minister English, failed to secure travellers the accommodation they need and are entitled to. As we know, local authorities send money back. In 1991, the Employment Equality Act and the Equal Status legislation was passed, and yet traveller unemployment remains around 80% today, when we're at almost full employment in the general population. In 2001, the Department of Education and Science published guidelines on traveller education in second-level schools. 18 years on, these guidelines were universally not adopted. Further action was taken in 2002 and 2005 with little progress. These examples underpin my case for mandatory teaching of traveller culture and history in schools. Otherwise, as Pavi Point states, things will be hit and miss and based very possibly on inaccurate information. In my bill, as proposed, developing a syllabus which would occur from expert bodies such as NCCA and other stakeholders would ensure consistent and mandatory delivery of some teaching on traveller culture and history in education. The proposed amendment does not achieve this. The proposed amendment would in effect remove the involvement of the NCCA, since no substantive area of syllabus is being developed, which is a shame given the substantive work that the NCCA has already done. We do not have time for schools to adopt this programme when it suits them. Traveller children can't wait. Traveller culture and history needs to be taught in schools across our country and as soon as possible. The amendments proposed by the Department do not reflect the urgency of the situation. So, would the Minister consider inserting a new section into the Education Act 1998 after Section 37? And my suggestion is as follows. The Minister may, having consulted with the NCCA and QQI, prescribe that traveller culture and history be taught in all recognised schools. B, be included as a mandatory part of the curriculum in all degree-level courses in education at higher education instruction. C, be promoted as a core competence of teachers in their ongoing professional development. That the national Council for Curriculum Assessment shall prescribe the curriculum to be followed pursuant to subsection 1A above. And Minister, would you also consider adding a traveller as a member of the NCCA, as I mentioned earlier? This would require amending Section 40 of the Education Act 1998, subsection 2B, by the insertion of after 2 of the following 3 area representatives are representatives of the traveller community. So again, I would ask the Minister to reconsider the points and ideas that I've put forward and to withdraw this amendment. And fourthly, and I'm coming to the end, you'll be glad to hear, I'm opposing this amendment due to the lack of specifics. When will this bill expect to be to pass through the Dáil and come into law? Will the Minister be taking the bill through himself? Notwithstanding my opposition to the Minister's amendment, the Minister taking this bill through to the Dáil would be of enormous significance and symbolism and importance to the traveller community. So, Minister, can you give me some more specifics as to the timeline of the bill and adjust the amendment accordingly? And will you, Minister, take the Traveller, Culture and History and Education Bill through to the Dáil on its passage here today? When could this be expected? And as I said, Minister, I do appreciate the audit that has been undertaken by the NCCA. I welcome your announcements on the inspectorate and also the inclusion and the consultation with the traveller community that will be at the heart of those changes around the inspection framework. And also I welcome the focus on the competency of teachers in reviewing in their ability to teach traveller culture and education when you're reviewing teacher education standards. Minister, for all those reasons, I'm opposing your amendments. I hope you will listen again to the arguments that I've made. I do wish to see this bill go through to the Dáil because I think it's an important bill. And I think, as I said, it would be of enormous significance that it would be you, Minister, rather than me, a lowly senator, would take this through. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Minister. So that's Amendment 1, which is a government amendment and has already been moved. Arises out of committee proceedings 1 to 4, as the last Cathaoirleach would have said, are inclusive and related and were discussed together. The question is that the amendment be made. Is that agreed?
Neil.
Agreed. Amendment 2, a government amendment, which I'm...
Not agreed.
Not agreed. Those in favour say Tá. Those against say Neil.
Neil.
I think the question is carried. Amendment 2 is a government amendment which I move, arising out of committee proceedings already discussed with Amendment 1. The question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say Tá. Those against say Neil.
Neil.
I think the question is carried. Amendment 3 is a government amendment which I move, arises out of committee proceedings already discussed with Amendment 1. The question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say Tá. Those against say Neil.
Neil.
I think the question is carried. Amendment 4 is a government amendment which I move, arises out of committee proceedings already discussed with Amendment 1. The question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say Tá. Those against say Neil.
Neil.
I think the question is carried. Senator Kelleher, did you want to make a brief contribution?
And it is brief.
Yeah.
It is brief. I just want to thank people. I mean, I'm disappointed. I would have liked that we were closer today, but I do feel that we have the basis of further conversation, and I do believe that we can do more work when this bill now can go to the Dáil. I'd like to thank Owen de Vordoon, who guided me through to this bill and so much more, and thanks to the members of the Traveller Advisory Group, which informed the audit, the Irish Traveller Movement and other NGOs locally and nationally, and thanks to everybody who shared sometimes very painful stories and all those who spoke at briefings. You continue to open my eyes. My world gets widened all of the time, and my words, which I know I mangle sometimes. And I appreciate what you teach me. That's not your job, but I am learning. And I want to thank my own little team, Ben Meany, who's listening in from Brussels, and the recently arrived but fully fledged Hannah Toomey, and of course the wisdom and expertise of Angus O'Mwelon. And thanks to James Kane, the barrister who drafted the bill, and Keela and my colleagues Lynn Ruan, Alice Mary Higgins, John Dolan Francis Black and Grace, who's now also in Brussels, and all the supportive senators here. And thank you, Minister, your advisors and your officials. I suppose, and this is very, very brief, when you are one of a people of 40,000 people, half the number of the crowd in Croke Park on an All-Ireland Day. So you're not talking about a huge number of people here. When you are Ireland's only recognised ethnic minority, when the very ground to travel was taken from under you, and when local authorities hand back money for the accommodation you need and you're entitled to, when heartless people turn away even when families and children burned, when school is a cold place, ignorant of who you are, where you came from and where you come from, where your hours at school are reduced or you drop out because you're bullied, your spirit and your identity not acknowledged and not cherished, when teachers don't know or teach your history, or even when the department sends on guidelines, when 80% of industrious people are unemployed in an economy with full employment, when your average life expectancy is 61, the life expectancy of the general population in the 1940s, now 75 for the rest of us, when your babies are 3 times more likely to die, when harsh words and hate words are what you hear most days, when hotels cancel funeral gatherings and weddings when they know who you are at the front of the queue for cuts and not much else, when traveller men are 7 times more likely to take their own lives than the general population, and women 6 times, when people know of people who have lost 6, 7 and 8 people in their close family to suicide, when resilient people stay strong in the face of these adversities, and when they say to you, education is the hope to break the cycle of racism, prejudice and discrimination through knowledge and learning by us all, when we know better means that we can almost certainly do better, when today, Minister, you have the chance to reflect on what you've heard in this House and even maybe change your mind a bit, when you're championing of the passage of a strong traveller culture and history and education bill, you will join the ranks of courageous politicians like Enda Kenny for his historic recognition of travellers as an ethnic minority, like Donna O'Malley for free secondary education and Niamh Brennock for free third-level education, like Maura Gagan Quinn for decriminalising homosexuality, like Micheál Martin for the smoking ban, like Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness for the Good Friday Agreement, and I would add Simon Harris for safe abortion care in Ireland. I'm a Taoiseach's nominee. Minister, your Taoiseach stated, prejudice has no place in this republic. So will you please, please, please champion the passage of this strong traveller culture and education bill onwards into the Dáil and into law? Minister, you will make history and join the ranks of politicians who break the mould and do the right thing. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Senator, for your heartfelt comments. The question is that the bill as amended be received for final consideration. Is that agreed? Agreed.
Agreed.
And just ask Senator Kelleher, when is it intended to take the next stage? No. Is that agreed? Agreed. That the bill do now pass. Is that agreed? Agreed. That the bill as amended do now pass. Apologies. Is that agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. That concludes.